Thank you, Allison. That was really humbling. And actually, I'm glad you covered stuff that I would never have gotten to. So, and thanks, Ted. Thanks, everybody, for having me here. I love being here because a couple of my great friends are here, Allison Smith and also Brian Conley, and they are also on the board at Mildred's Lane, which I'm going to talk to at the very end of this lecture. And Allison actually worked on cottage industry, which you're going to see a few flashes of, and I'll point that out. Allison's done a lot of projects with us, and so I'm just going to go ahead and start. My method here is I'm just going to talk to you, even though I can't see you now, because they're filming, I guess. So I'm just talking to some shining glasses and vague silhouettes. Let me get it. So my method is I'm just letting it flash. This is new. I'm just not talking to the projects, but there'll be a question-answer period because this is going to go very fast, and it's about, I don't know, about 50 or 60 minutes long. And then we can have a longer question period about specific projects. And I'm not used to holding a mic, so tell me if you can't hear me or anything. Well, Allison told you I'm just going to show you the first. I've got 4 sort of chapters here, and I'm showing you the historical part. And I got to make a really definitive statement about how and why I ended up and still am linked to fashion. Is because I believe fashion is a symbolic system that is used, negotiated, or imposed by every person on the planet. I don't think any of us escape it. I don't care who you are and what kind of t-shirt you have on, you have to deal with it. And it's that really, after going to that Metropolitan story that she told, that was epiphanic for me, and I suddenly had to sort of rethink my position as a artist who is working in material culture, outdoor installation, site-specific work, and everything. As a young artist in art school, I was already sort of thinking and working in modes of dwelling, clothing, researching, living, and this is way back, before they even had a term project artist. I was already sort of working in that mode. But I was a little bit of a rebel, so I sort of set out after that epiphanic moment, and I started a series of what I thought they were critical installations, sort of interventions in the fashion system. I saw there was this vast landscape I could jump into and just really explore and learn as I go, and that's my favorite thing, as learning as I go, is the one thing that motivates me to do a project or installation or research, is that I want to learn something about it. I knew nothing about fashion. I mean, if someone in art school had said I was going to be a fashion designer, international fashion designer, I would have laughed and spit on their toes and said, "What? No way." But, it just happened. And interestingly, I got into that whole world. And actually, there's someone here that will have to identify herself, who actually had a store here in San Francisco and bought and sold my clothes. So she might can get involved with the question-answer stuff later. And anyway, my installations, I had 5 installations in New York, but there were installations within installations. So what's very unknown about my practice, because the worlds have always been so discriminating, segmented. Fashion sneered at art, art sneered at fashion. Of course, now they pretend to sort of love each other now. But it still exists, these prejudices, these disciplinary prejudices exist. And I like to just term myself as a transdisciplinarian, because I'm also an amateur architect. And those guys really hate it. I mess with that stuff. But I believe that fashion, in itself as a system, is at the intersection of all of these discourses. All of the discourses that I'm interested in, anyway, is being in the world and inventing new modes of being in the world. And almost every one of the projects that you're going to just see flash before you deals with that in some aspect. And they go off in all sorts of areas. They're completely entangled and chaotic and complex. But there's always something that's threaded through, and it's the fashion work, and it's my entangled autobiographical experiences in the fashion industry. Just to sort of wrap that off, I developed this company. It had troubles. You know, I was an artist. I did not know about business. I did not know how to actually function in that hierarchical mode, because my being is all about, you know, collaborating. And I learned how to do that best in that arena of fashion, because you can't just do it alone. You have to depend on someone. And my studio practice, I like to describe as, was always a public one. I was always working in the social sphere. I was always, without even realizing back then. Now, of course, there's a great contemporary theory and terminology that attaches a lot of fancy terms to this, you know, but I was naively grasping at these, you know, critical ideas and critical projects along the way, again, learning as I go. And the quotidian was always sort of a launching place for me. I am interested in what communities are, but what they're actually doing, what are they actually thinking, how are they actually processing day to day. And I'm not really interested in, when I enter a project, or even these collections that emerged out of installations, with actually the emergence is an important tool for me and always has been, is that there has to be some sort of organic nature to getting to a place, and that is always emergent. I am not an artist that's going to sum it up for you and determine what you're going to see. I want you to have a participation in the project, even in my stores. And also, I want to be a viewer and a participant in my own projects as well. So that's sort of where I position myself. This is the project. I'm just going to sidebar here, because where's Allison? Allison, I met her. She, my partner then, Mark Dion, and I had just gotten this place at Mildred's Lane, and Mark Dion had Allison as a student at Yale, and the whole 1999, was it 1999 class, Allison? Came out, and they were the first group of students that came on our land and did a project with us, which was a garden that Nils Norman and I had designed, and still sort of trying to, you know, rough on designing it. So it's an ongoing project. But Allison and her friends came out, and they are still our best friends. They are all close friends, completely successful practitioners. Allison helped me, Tricia Donnelly, Anna Craycroft, Adam Putnam. They're all in the world. And this is sort of what started inkling. Tell me who else was with that in your class there, that they're all producing. They're all in the world and producing art. But what really struck me, you know, in the last few years was they were all getting these great, successful careers. And I realized Mildred's Lane, some things, a series of things had happened there that no one was really noticing. It was a very quiet sort of just lifestyle that now we call work styles, and I'm going to talk more about that later. But Allison came to collaborate on cottage industry. I had a series of visiting artists from my friends from New York, and Allison came down for several weeks and devoted generously her time. And did we already pass your piece? It's coming up here. Alice had contributed a couple of pieces because this project had a whole contemporary art collection in it, and those artists were another emergent part of that project that was the emergent community within the project that came up. And so they all, there it is right there, the patchwork. And there's another one that she did, and I don't think I have a picture of it. Anyway, this is going to go fast, and I'm starting to dwell on cottage industry and Allison, so I'm going to move on. But anyway, back to the community. So I really I believe strongly that, I'm going to have to take my coat off, it's so hot in here, that the community should just put that aside for a while and not think about what it's going to look like. You know, it's really hard for me as an artist, because I'm a project artist, I'm not an object commodity person, but presenting myself into grants, committees, institutions, they all want to know what it's going to look like. And they all want to know, what's going to happen and what community is it going to speak to. And I strongly believe that in a practice, you must put those things aside and let those things emerge. You cannot determine what community it's going to speak to. You cannot predetermine a community. That is an entirely personal, very eccentric thing that happens everywhere, every day on the planet, in the hallways of your school, on the streets of San Francisco, in the world. You cannot predetermine that. And I think it's an awfully cocky role for an artist to think that they can sum up their project as a one-liner for you to view. So my practice sort of opposes that in every way. I'm definitely not a one-liner artist or a plop artist. And the more complex it is, the more engaged an audience is, and the more engaged I am. And I think that's where my genuine love of my practice is I want to be engaged, God damn it, Let me switch here for a second. Okay. I'm going to go into these projects that were sort of after my partner fired me from my life project, my fashion stores, or I call them my installations. And that's a whole nother story someone can ask me about. I'll talk about that a little bit. I had this sort of parallel installation project practice to my stores, and you saw a bunch of those there. But, once I sort of left that world, I realized I could actually slow down the process a little bit and go to where I really intended to go, and which was reassemble the terms of each thing that I was doing. I'm very fascinated with the needle trade. The needle trade, as they term it in history, is anything relating to cloth, textile, clothing, manufacturing, milling, history. I love that stuff. So I think my passion for that history and my experiences in the fashion industry led me on this path of curiosity. Again, critical curiosity to go through these things, to learn more about the things that I was really interested in. And the Fabric Workshop invited Mark and I to do a project. And we had already done a previous project, Nurse Grimm, that got us really interested in the uniform. So the study, we had to sort of hone down into the American nurse's uniform, which was really began this broad landscape into more than just about the uniform itself, but about tropes of knowledge and how style affects knowledge. And that is what I got really interested in this project. It was an elaborate installation. It had 5 chapters. I mean, it covered the image of the nurse in popular culture. We had, a series of film clips from, 100 years of film history where the nurses were, eroticized. There's an image that sort of speaks to that. We borrowed from several institutions, over 600 objects in this installation that we borrowed. We had experts that were from the Center of the Study of the History of Nursing at University of Pennsylvania, who completely just gave up everything they could and got involved with this project. And that's another element of my methodology, is that outside interests, the professional interests outside of art, the practitioners that are in other disciplines, collaborate with us and bring, or they get involved, as Allison termed it, because I use that term so that you can delineate from the messed up and confused term collaboration. But their involvements completely legitimize our work in the real. So we're not creating fantasy or fiction. We're actually really curiously discovering what the ideal nurse's uniform could be, what the future of the nurse's uniform could be. So we had to actually enter the landscape of inventing tropes of knowledge into the future to understand how would a nurse and who that nurse would be, how would they clothe themselves. We collaborated with retired nurses, practicing nurses, student nurses. They all had harsh opinions. And these are some of the images that they came up with. And this is like a classic 50s nurse, and we were really disappointed. Like, wait a minute, this looks like what the 20th century had to say about the uniform, and this is not what we want you to do. This is what Vermont College Master of Fine Arts came up with. Then we collaborated with Vermont College students and got the nurses to pull out from their closets their most favorite things, and then we built this body of clothing using future fabrics and cutting-edge textiles that became the ideal nurse's uniform. And actually a manufacturer wanted to produce this and actually market this nationwide, but it was the cost. They got them, They want to sell those uniforms for like $2, and this was not going to be $2. These are diagrams and installations that were in that project that are about the future nurse's uniform, and so we had to invent these elaborate sci-fi. And I think they're on my website. The language is really fun. Mark and I got very involved with it. We also worked with a colleague, Ian Kerr, on the diagrams because I was being tutored in Photoshop and Illustrator and sort of inventing as I went, in art directing the whole thing. But it was really important for me not to get so caught up that where my fashion history imposed its design, and I try to be very careful in all of these projects that it's not just about my aesthetic interests of the past, but I'm trying to get to a place where I can collaborate with the world. And the next project is going to demonstrate that a little bit. This is the post-apocalyptic nurse. And she is like a walking hospital. She has every seam is put together by Ziploc seams, so you can rip off a sleeve and get your gadgets and your drugs at hand, and you can beam out. And they sort of we invented whole sci-fi fantasies about these characters. This is my favorite, the intergalactic nurse, where the whole design is based on the chi flow of acupuncture system. So there are 46 panels and seams and pattern pieces in this system, and it's all silverized fibers that are completely medicinal, or antimicrobial, stain resistant. Okay, this is a really exciting project. The multiple suit, the discerning man, woman, or other, unrivaled and perfect fitting, ease of handling, quick adjustment, great complexity is the advertisement. So here, I was literally sort of so disturbed by that experience in my life where that my best friend fired me from my own business, and I never have gotten over that. I never understood it, except that I think that I was just too busy over here, and she was upset about that. And so she did a hostile takeover of my company, and I think she actually eventually put it into the ground, which it was good. It liberated me because I was able to go on to do these things. So it allowed this whole field of potentiality that I've jumped into. But I had always wanted to do this project about the suit because she wanted to create this lawsuit, and I just thought, God, this is not worth it, I want not to do this. I want to make a project out of it. And I researched on this for many years, and finally Mass MoCA asked me to submit an idea and commissioned me to do a new project. So I said immediately, I want to do a project about the mill history and the history of the three-piece suit, and I want to collaborate with Mass MoCA as an administrative entity. Because another important aspect of my work that will come up, and I could answer questions about this later, is I'm interested in moving away, and I have been for a decade, institutional critique. All of my friends were really the institutional critique crowd, and I have sort of always manifested that it should be a co-evolving position that we take as artists, especially now in the 21st century. It's so important that we, understand these, amorphous spaces of critical thinking that allow us to do these things in the first place. Anyway, it's that we somehow find this place of co-evolving, collaborating, being involved, and somehow moving into a different arena in the 21st century. And I think in all of my practices, I've learned where to put the problem of critique. I really think that now it has taken a new position, and I'm talking to that in my work all along the way. But here, just to give you a little quick synopsis of this, the history of the suit. Okay, it goes in all directions. I mean, the only way to sort of reassemble these terms was to sort of invent an algorithm, which is what I've done in all of these works, back to even cottage industry and even my work in the stores in New York, are these simple algorithms. This is a big term, but I work it as a tool very crudely, and I will explain that later. But you can see this is how crude an algorithm can be derived from a Rod Serling teleplay in 1956, and who's just doing a teleplay about the behavior in the dog-eat-dog corporate world. So I'm interested in human behavior, of how my partner fired me. I can never get over that. And so this project sort of like still is emerging out of that. And this is still sort of going on. I actually am putting this project to bed in a traveling show that's opening up in May at Madison Contemporary Museum of Art, and it's called Confessions of a Corporation. So anyway, in the middle of this project, I formed a real corporation, since I didn't have one anymore. And I invited a friend, Ian Kerr, to collaborate with me. And we took all the material and the algorithmic material and continued and created a series of patterns and created a suit that's not a 3-piece suit, but a 36-piece suit that comes together as a pant, a skirt, moves away, comes back as a jacket, a dress. And what you're seeing is a friend, Barack Olin's, sort of doing a touching and fitting, displaying many options of this thing. And what happens in this installation, when you come to Mass MoCA, you enter this third floor kind of squat, and you don't really believe it smells like burnt wood. It's got oil smells, and you can come in and have a touching and fitting. You can make an appointment and say, I want to order a piece of suit. And the suit is actually so expensive as a whole 36-piece that what happens is people started saying, well, I can't afford that, but I'd like something like a vest. So they started ordering a piece of suit so they could actually afford, and so we would start from commerce and say, what can you afford? And they'd say, well, I can afford $100. So we'd give them options of they would collaborate with us to come to $100 piece of suit. This project had many chapters. Many of my projects just keep living on and on. This went across to France, and Ian and I set up shop in this ruin in the middle of a vineyard and engaged a retired French couturier who actually started sewing the pieces of suit. This is our workshop. We were poor. So, and what happened ultimately was very sad, but kind of the tragedy of the multipled suit. And I say multipled, it's not multiplied, it's not multiple, it's multipled. I'm always inventing terms for my projects too. So anyway, here we are trying to describe poor Madame Chandon how to put the suit together. And this is actually because we wanted to move it into the future. This is a sort of a futurist version of the suit, and this and this. And I also moved my patterns from other projects and merged them with the current project. So I've accumulated this new language of patterns. And the next project will speak to that, lost meaning. Madame Chandon actually disappeared, fell back into alcoholism, and we never heard from her again after that. And I hate to think that the 36-piece suit had something to do with that, but I think we shamed her into it. She's okay now. I've heard she's okay. All right, the last meeting. Julie Courtney collaborated on this project. She was the curator, and she got me a Pew Charitable Trust grant for this, and it was great because I sort of pitched it a couple of times, and then, finally she got it. And then in turn, I invited all my friends to work on it with me, and at that time I was working with the collective Spurse, and I'm no longer with Spurse, but we were very embedded, doing a lot of projects together at that time. And they're started out as an architectural collective, which I was very drawn to. So we started a series of investigations about the history of this building. I was a little nervous about going into Quaker history because, oh God, it's religion. I was raised by an atheist. I don't really have a situation in religion. I just think it's destroyed the world, and that's that, and we're picking up the pieces now. But this project really opened my eyes, and I started relating to religion as culture. So these are cultures. So the Quaker culture is what I got really interested in, and did a lot of homework in all the museums around the area, and we collaborated with all the museums who held Quaker collections of material culture. So material culture was very important to this project, and I'm not going into depth here in any of these, so I hope y'all just forgive me because I'm just abbreviating everything and talking about points that come to my mind. But we set up this elaborate drafting studio, architectural drafting, pattern drafting, and came to realize that the problem of the pattern was what we wanted to investigate and deal with and build an installation around. And the problem of the pattern is really interesting because all over, in our existence, it's all we have really is everything's reducible to the pattern. The chair here is a pattern. Your pant leg, Fleming, is a pattern. It's the stage is a pattern, but it's static. And I'm interested in, as was Spurse, interested in finding a tactic to push through the static. And instead of, solving problems as a creative practice, but to create problems complexly to move through the static solutions of a problem. So again, this is a reoccurring methodology in each of these installations. And you can see we're taking like a Quaker bonnet, a Quaker shawl, but then we're going to move it through a series of play and manipulation and ending up in a computer in a 3D imaging source where we're completely trying to get to a movable pattern. And so we produced about over 200 patterns that was based on the Quaker history, the 19 members who built this little meeting house called the Lost Meeting, and that was actually its real nickname in the 19th century, and which, the history becomes a very big player in all of my work, obviously. And the 19 people became an algorithm to turn this material culture into that. And that's sort of our static pattern that and in turn became part of the building, strangely. There's always some magical thing that happens in these things, but then we did this and spun the patterns into a 3D mode, became this, and then, got students and schools to try to interpret this into a garment, or this, so this is sort of the workshop and the product from material culture to 3D imaging. Okay, let me move to the next one. I'm sorry I'm popping my peas on this thing all the time. I'm not used to holding a mic. Okay, This project is one that I just did. I was in Chicago teaching and doing a project, and a lot of times I like to do a project and there's a pedagogical aspect to it. And this was great because, the school invited me, different departments of the school invited me, sort of unbeknownst to each other, and then they got together and realized that I should, be doing something there. And why is it not working? Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Okay. Whoa. No. Is it the last one? Oh, sorry. Oh, it is. Golly, thanks. All right, so this is a collaboration. And there's a little film that sort of, in the research we came out with this. Chicago has this incredible modernist history. And actually they're building a new modern museum to the wing. And it was like completely topical that I do this project in this space. The Carson Perry Scott building that was now sort of divided up into all these industries. The architecture department of the School of the Art Institute is on the 12th floor. The fashion department's on the 7th floor. 20,000 square feet of what used to be the rug department of this department store is now the School of the Art Institute of Chicago galleries that Mary Jane Jacob, who is a dear friend and a great inspiration to me. And so we both sort of came up with this idea that we needed to address modernism, and she's actually working on a huge exhibition about the subject that's coinciding, an opening is coinciding with the opening of the Art Institute's new modern wing. And I'm not going to be able to go into all the history, but it's fascinating. But the building is a Sullivan building. And this is the ornamentation. That's a Sullivan drawing. The building is fascinating. I sort of discovered Sullivan here and just loved reading his autobiography and which is I recommend it as the function of an idea or something like that. And anyway, I wanted to immediately do something with display cases and created this elaborate game that would be a way to interface the entire school and the entire city of Chicago and other institutions. And this game we created, which had other collaborators, many other collaborators, and the people who ran it was a department store staff, which was Rachel Moore, who was the department store manager, Ellen Hartwell, who was the supervisor of interconnectivity, and Suhan Ho, who was the officer of algorithms, and Morgan Puett, who was the ambassador of entanglement. And what happened is we installed like 130 display cases in this space, and we posed a question to the school and to Chicago: what is important? What would your case be, and how would you display it? And so anybody could subscribe to this. So again, as many of my projects, I'm acting as a curator. I'm collaborating with a curator. And this had a slow start, and there was an elaborate algorithm that was based on the history of department stores, the weather of Chicago, the timeline of the growth of department stores, Louis B. Sullivan's life history, School of the Art Institute data. People visiting the space created an elaborate algorithm that functioned as a way to suddenly shift, move, motion the display cases every 3 days as triggered by the lunar phases of the moon. So I was interested in thingness. Things, us and things, are interconnectivity to things, as you see in all my projects, and as Allison so beautifully described, that are so important to my practice. But how do we collaborate with things? How do we be in this wilderness of things? And that's my office. And we even created these beautiful little costumes. Like I say, there's that element in every piece. But this is the map of the algorithmic moves of the cases. So here we had this modernist sort of Juddean grid that suddenly is being tripped off by the algorithm and this creating this chaotic motion of, and they're all bumping into each other every 3 days. And there's this community service that comes in that students and classes who are collaborating on the cases, I mean, over 500 people collaborated on this project, which was amazing in itself. But they also took turns and did community service and came in and read the algorithm and moved the cases where they should be every 3 days. Oh, it's over already? Oh, let me finish up. And so those things would collide. And when there was a collision in the game, remember this is an elaborate game, those people would have to come out and discuss with each other what was important between them, and have an exchange system. So there's an incredible documentation system of thousands and thousands of objects, thousands of dialogues. And me as the ambassador of entanglement was there merely not as an artist, but somebody to mediate the collisions. So each collision, if there was a confusion or a conflict, they had to come into the office of the ambassador of entanglement and discuss it. And I had a whole methodology within the project to do. So again, project within a project within a project. Just there are so many things active and activated at each turn in all of these projects. Okay, how are we on time? Anybody know? I'm now going to talk about the LIFE project. I'm going fast, aren't I? I'm going to talk about my LIFE project, which is this collaboration. Hang on, I'm going to pause this for a second because I want to read a quote. How do I do that? Let me start all over. I want to read a quote. It's on our website. Oops, damn it. All right. Oh, I need my glasses. Oh, damn it. I almost have it memorized. I'll try to. If I stumble, y'all forgive me, right? Okay. Monsieur Foucault. I dream of a new age of curiosity. I'm not going to do it in a French accent. We have the technical means for it. The desire is there. The things to be known are infinite. The people who can employ themselves at the task exist. Why do we suffer? From too little, from channels that are too narrow, skimpy, quasi-monopolistic, insufficient. There is no point in adopting a quasi-protectionist attitude to prevent bad information from invading and suffocating the good. Rather, we must we must simply multiply the paths and the possibilities of the comings and goings. Thank you, Mr. Foucault. That really is an important quote to me. And Mildred's Lane, I'm going to sort of start showing you this thing, but it was something that, again, emerged out of mine and Mark's practice. It's our common interest and love of generosity in practice that this sort of started happening. And there was a critical point where we really both realized we needed to take it seriously and formalize it to some extent. We are not a non-for-profit. It is an artist project, but it's not only our artist project, it's our friends' project. Allison Smith is on the board and has done much work out here. Brian Conley's going to come next summer, aren't you, Brian? Where are you? So this is really kind of an evolving thing. We don't know what's going to happen. It could fall apart next year, who knows? But it's the grand experiment, and it is a passionate project. Let me go ahead and start it. All right, you got it. Okay, what it is a large-scale collaboration between myself, Mark Dion, and our associates who are fellow transdisciplinary practitioners. And things were happening at this chunk of land. I'm not going to look at these slides. They'll distract me. And we started to have things happen here over the last 12 years and beyond, really, at the other place I lived at out there, that suddenly were forming something that we didn't really realize. It was sort of a silent, invisible, like I said earlier, invisible practice that was kind of happening that was sort of bigger and greater than us. So it's not something that we're authoring, it's something that we're open to the experimentation. So it's definitely a site of experimentation, but it's a very quiet site, and it has been quiet in the world of these things as they evolve, because we didn't really realize what was happening as it was happening. But we always did have this desire that what we could do was have this ongoing relationship to environmental practices, to socially engaged research and practices, and most importantly, artistic domesticating, which is my specialty. So anyway, there were this series of crusty outbuildings. Allison sort of described what we did there. We lived there, even camped there for 2 years before we actually rebuilt one of the buildings. And now it has evolved into a place that sort of is open from May to September, and we have public days, which are every Saturday, and you're able to come by requesting an RSVP on the website to come to a public dinner and a lecture. But our friends and fellow practitioners are weaving in and out and proposing projects, and we're now working with school curriculums. School of the Art Institute has us on their catalog, so students can actually sign up for any one of the courses that we offer. They have a set limit that we'll accept from their applicants. And then Columbia and Parsons are also sending students and even offering scholarships, and we want CCA to do the like, please. But, it's built on those kind of associations. It's like what we want to move away, again, the institutional critique mode and co-evolve with the institutions. So where it's a low impact and very flexible developed curriculum with institutions and very open to the exchange that we have. You're just seeing a bunch of participants right now. But just other things that are happening there, I'm just flashing them. I'm not able to talk too deeply about each project, but it's not about plop art. It's a living museum. We're interested in reassembling the terms of the contemporary art complex. That's where it begins for us. It's not merely artist projects, but it's actually an ongoing sort of emergent museum. I kind of hate to even use that term because it's so loaded, but we want this to be an experiment, and we invite our colleagues to be involved. And there are several practitioners who have been involved for a long period of time, and that's who you're looking at. Allison's one of them. And things just happen that are magical. I can't even describe it. It's like you set up a series of events. You don't really know what's going to happen, but then something actually happens. It's tucked away in northeastern Pennsylvania. It's 96 acres right off of the Delaware River on the border of New York State, about 100 miles out of New York City. So we're in and out of New York a lot, but it is an unusual environment. What else can I say about it? This is also another California artist, Scott Constable, who did that treehouse. This is a Mark Nyon installation there, the Memento Mori. In Pennsylvania, you can't be buried on your land unless you already have an existing cemetery. So Mark did this installation in Philadelphia that then went to Aldrich, and then we finally got to build our cemetery on our land. And now all of our friends are starting to work on their epitaphs and designing their headstones. Again, this was the Exode, which is an extension of the That Word project. So there's always something going on there. Multiple things are going on. And you can actually just sort of email and make an appointment to come and see. We're not really, currently the mode of the complex is not so obvious. It's a series of 19th century outbuildings, architectural vernacular interventions, landscape interventions, very discrete projects that you sort of trip over. You don't even realize that it's something that's happened there, and it's definitely not going to be a sculpture park. It's a living complex. That's Allison doing her first performance at Mildred's Lane. You remember that, Allison? Some of your students can ask her about that one. It was very erotic. This is Allison's muster. That she did a sort of a dress rehearsal before she got the big Public Art Fund project at Governor's Island, which was magnificent. That was me. I went AWOL on her muster project. So it was fabulous. We obviously are doing a lot of costume dramas out there because we like them. That's my practice. So there's any opportunity to do something with that, with textile. And that's your Public Art Fund broadsheet, right? This is a project I did at Wave Hill that's now an artist residency. It's now turned into a bedroom. And there's one of our last year's students. This is an Amy Yo's piece that was originally in Socrates Park, and that is now being resited and recolored and retooled for Mildred's Lane. So now we call it the lean-to sign and variant, because it is actually a camp now, a lean-to camp in the woods in the Pine Grove. This is a Brian Toll project, Skid Row's. It was our grand opening last year. He and Diana Balmori collaborated and did this elaborate sort of radical gardening project. They outfitted this pickup truck with direct sewed seam contraptions. They spun donuts in the fields, and that was the garden. It grew, excuse me, it grew 7-foot-high cosmos and sunflowers all summer long. It was amazing. And this is when the flowers were first coming up. And the truck stayed there, sort of stalled out for the rest of the summer. He got a little bit goozled up, and we thought he should stop, so it just stayed there. This is the Mildred's Lane Historical Society and Museum that I think you saw earlier, and we spent 3 years preserving that building into residencies in the attic, and it's also a little living museum in the basement. Last year there was a session called Mildred Archaeology where students worked with Mark Dion to actually, that's our textile collection that the rats and the mice built and that we have installed in the basement. So we created and peeled back 5 different renovations of this little building. And so the history of the place is still intact, but we're layering, of that 19th century history, we're layering our contemporary history and designing sort of an emergent history that can go into the future. So it's got this very complex life in it, and it's still an ongoing project, and we welcome involvement with it. That's what we pulled out of the basement. It's a beautiful little building. It's like a passionate project of mine. These are the first students that worked on the excavation and the rebuilding of the sills and the foundation. And this is what they built as a bonfire. We're very famous for our bonfires, and every session and every project creates a bonfire that we sort of burn at the end of each session. Columbia students built a quarry dining room. So Michael Oatman did a beautiful presentation in the quarry. This is our local historian, Walter Barb, who we call upon frequently to talk about the land. And here he's talking about Mildred, because Mildred was actually his maid. He lives just down the road, so he had a great history about her as we were working on this archaeology. Textiles from the Mildred house. wallpaper from the Mildred house reassembled in the basement. And what you're about to see is the poetry that got reassembled because the basement was such a mess. We couldn't even walk into it for years. And then after we worked with the students installed this beautiful workbench coming right up. This is her pantry, Mildred's pantry, reinstalled in the basement. This is the back wall that there's this sort of textile installation of Mildred textile into a strange nest, because there's all sorts of varmints that live in this building. And then this is the workbench. And so you get to see the pictures of the artists who collaborated on it. So they are also now in the archive of Mildred's Lane history. But it's a believable installation, and it's functional, but it's all Mildred. We did sort of embellish with we had to, get a few tools at the flea market and embellish a little, but it's quite wonderful. The second session last year was called Retail 21st Century. And first we installed a show in my gallery in New York. My gallerist asked us to do a Mildred's Lane exhibition for the summer. And so all artists that had been associated historically with Mildred's Lane, we sort of, Mark and I curated, and they put work in that. Allison had work, Josiah, Jason, Jack, all of our friends. This is working with food at Mildred's Lane. There's no thing in the subject of work styles, there's no area of the everyday that goes unattended. The everyday is, this is our food. Inventing a table each night is part of our practice. Even the refrigerator is an ongoing installation that people are collaborating with, so that you open the refrigerator and you take a gasp, because there's something going on in there that's unusual. Dalton Conley speaking in the barn, Hope Ginsberg. Y'all should have Hope out here. She's great. This is us fooding, and these are the portraits of the students in Retail 21st Century. And that's a project Allison Smith's very involved with. She was there last year. She's here next year with Christine Hill, who's heading out the session. It's a huge collaborative project that's going to culminate in reassembling the terms of retail in the 21st century in the year 2010-2011, and we're going to have a very large-scale, global-scale installation, nomadic installation, with dozens of practitioners performing, being involved, installing, selling, exchanging. We're inventing a new form of exchange for the retail world. This is Robert Williams, a project that's coming up this year. And he's collaborating with Mark Dion on the Alchemist Shack. And there's details on our website, milderslane.com. And these are a list of projects that are coming up. Pond and Pond House with Natalie Jerman-Jinko and Mark Dolman. And also the Bear Grotto coming up. And that's our reference library. And I think that's the very last slide. And thank you very much. I just want to tell you one last thing that's really important to me. Being as an artist is a practice. Thank you. Okay, I'll take questions now, so maybe we can get the lights up a little bit. Thank you. It was really hard talking to that dark space. I like to see people. Are there any questions? Yes. Introduce yourself. Which was called?
What happened to all the boxes in the cell?
They're in the Bubblegum Playland house. Never, no. They're still there. There's a beautiful installation. It's a Mark Dion installation. I'm not touching it. It's like valuable. That was a project that she's referring to. That's like when Mark Dion and I first met, and we're not lovers now, we're partners in this project. He's married someone else now, but we're best friends, and we have a child together named Gray Rabbit Puett. And he sent me for years packages, it was sort of his first package, because he does a lot of work like this, that I didn't know what was in them, and that we would collect them over years and designate a time where we would both agree that we would open them. But, life went on, we separated, and I have not opened them. I think I've got like 70 packages that have precious things in them that I know I would love and want. But just knowing that is good. Question? Yeah.
Vocabulary, what's plop art?
Oh, well, it's a sculpture that has it's static. It's a determined practice of sculpture that means that, and I mean, it's not a critique when I say that. I don't want to insult anybody here, but it's a mode of sculpture. It is something that sort of moves in, is presented to the world, and the world digests it. It doesn't have a life after its position, so it's static. It's plop, and that's not my phrase. That's actually Public Art Fund did a book, and the title was plop. It's sort of a slang for it. And if anybody wants to add to that description, feel free to explain.
Yeah, I think it just comes from the fact that a certain generation of public commissions were decided by committees and public art departments of cities, and that they would designate as a plaza or a
Right.
exhibit